Anytime I speak publicly and I'm the week before an earnings call, I pay special attention to this forward-looking statement. If any of you are shareholders, or if any of you are thinking about being shareholders, please make sure you do a lot of homework. Read our 10K, read our 10Q, really, do a ton of work. There are forward-looking statements in what I say today. I'm going to talk about the markets. I'm going to talk about SAIC and where we are. If you're going to make an investment decision, do your homework. Look at all of our public disclosures before the SEC. Get on the website. Most of this is dated as of March the 25th. And I'll point out that our earnings call is next week, June the 3rd. So please don't make any investment decisions over what you just hear today. Do your homework and be careful, thoughtful investors. For those of you who are students or teachers, in the world we live in today, you've got to be really, really thoughtful about fair disclosure. So anything you say to a small group, you're saying to the entire investment community. And you're always looking for avenues to allow that to occur. I'm going to talk about 3 different time horizons in the context of where SAIC is in terms of its business. The first one is from General Mike Hayden. And it was his top 10 list for the first 12 months as he was thinking about the transition from President Bush to President Obama. And we're now 5 months into this. So think of this as how we at the company are thinking about the world around us for the next 6 months, our next 2 quarters. I've got 2 other horizons in here. I've got another one about halfway through the presentation where I'll be talking about the world we face for about the next year. And then I'll conclude with a look out to 2025. And as business people, you always have to think about time as an incredibly important element in whatever you're planning. You want to look for that long-term, really far-reaching look when you're making big capital investments. You're always thinking strategically, and what I've found is that time horizon's collapsed on us. It used to be I never went without a 5-year strategic look. I'm not going out much past 3 years today. And I'm re-looking at every quarter. Just going back and validating, do we have enough sensors out there in the world around us? How much has it changed? And what we've noticed is the rate of change is accelerating. The world's far more chaotic. And sort of the consistency, continuity that we expected as we were doing strategic planning a decade ago, it no longer exists. So that time horizon's collapsed a little bit. But as a management team, you really want to think about what time horizon are you operating in at the moment. And while you're trying to hit this month or this quarter, step back and think what you're going to accomplish over the year, and step back even further and think about where you're taking your company or your team over a 3 to 5 year period. So for us, this is the 6-month look. And when Mike was looking at it, he said, you know what, right out of the gate, my number 1 issue is Al-Qaeda attacking the United States. They thought about the World Trade Center for over a decade. They went after it twice. And then all of a sudden, you see this new attack in India where 12 people armed with cell phones and weapons shut down Mumbai and really got the attention of the globe for about a week and a half. And if you think of the creativity that took and how aggressive it was, that's Mike's first concern. Is right out of the gate, do we have some probability that might happen in the United States? And if it does, it's going to have a non-predictable set of consequences to our economy and how we operate as a society and a culture. The second set starts to get really involved with all the complexities of the Middle East, everything around Central Asia, and how it affects global resources and the global economy. Now the centerpiece is Pakistan. Tremendous change in governance, classic tensions that really characterize the world we face today. So think of ethnic and tribal rivalries. Think of a nation that was formed because of the tension as the British Empire fell apart between Hindu and Muslim and core religious and cultural differences. Every one of those exists today. It's a very transitional government that lacks some stability. And oh, by the way, it's a haven for Al-Qaeda. It allows for a resurrected Taliban. And you've got the potential for concerns around controls of nuclear weapons. So when you bring all of that together, it's kind of tumultuous and great concern for national security. Because of that, you think of Israel in the election they just went through, and you think of Iran in the election they're about to go through. Almost always, natural tensions have peaks around election time. So with Israel and with Netanyahu rising to power, you saw a bit more aggressiveness on the part of the Israelis. And when you're the smallest guy on the block, at times you've got to act the toughest. So when you think back to 2006 and the challenges they faced in Lebanon when they confronted Hezbollah, they had to make a statement in the world we see today, and they did it in Gaza. I mean, they basically recreated their military capability to assert force in the Middle East. That was troubling as the U.S. is trying to, somehow get to a two-state solution. What everybody's really worried about, though, is how are they reacting to Iran? So Iran's been very aggressive with the development of a nuclear capability. They're demonstrating long-range missiles, and they've got a declaratory policy to destroy Israel. So everyone's kind of watching, will the Obama plan to try to lower the tension level be successful, and how will Israel act? And many of you probably watched who's been visiting, President Obama, this first 100 days. And we've seen the leadership of Pakistan, Afghanistan, Israel coming to Washington, D.C., delegations going there. And what it tells us is there's probably never been a more fragile point in our national security than what we face these next couple of quarters. And it all centers around the stability of Pakistan, how it's affected by Afghanistan, Iraq, as well as Israel. Iran, just watch, for the next 2 months, as they go through elections. One of the things that's always amazed U.S. national security, no one has a clue how decisions are made in Iran. We just don't know. We think we do, we don't. There are hierarchies of decision making that really aren't discernible from the outside. And when you're trying to deal with an imminent nuclear power that's vocally hostile and threatening much to the region, as well as specifically to Israel, it's a challenge for us and our security over the next 2 quarters. North Korea, Mike has a great comment, they're always petulant. With every new administration, they have the nation-state behavior of a 3-year-old who kind of throws food on the floor and waits for somebody to clean it up. But they do it with nuclear tests, underground nuclear tests, and they do it with the launch of missiles. So think of petulant at the nation-state level, threatening the survival of South Korea and threatening Japan and others within the region. And they're predictably going through that drill right now. Now, what are they looking for? Usually money. There'll be some program where we subsidize North Korea for yet another 4 to 8 years of some administration. And whether it's a Republican or a Democratic president, the one thing you can count on during time of transition, North Korea will be petulant and it'll be dangerous for all of us. Afghanistan is far more dangerous and far more of a problem right now than Iraq. So the Taliban has been very successful in establishing power on those Pashtun border areas between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And when you're so concerned about stability in Pakistan, you can't separate and think of borders in a classic sense. You got to think about stabilizing across that entire region. When you think of, well, why are we in Afghanistan? Any nation that's ever tried to do anything there has failed. Well, the reason we're there is because the uncertainty of stability in Pakistan and nuclear weapons. That's why we're there. So over the next year, you're going to see the U.S. and possibly NATO continue to try to bring stability to that region. And I'll talk to, I think, the concept that they're going to use in a minute. China, what everybody fears over the next 2 quarters is think of the growth rate they've been on. Think how inextricably tied they are to the United States in terms of the integration of our economies. If China trips, how well do they recover? Think of the massive growth rate they're on. We all know that's not forever. At some point in time, every growth curve has a downside to it. No one has a clue how China reacts in downside. You've got 800 million mad peasants who really aren't benefiting from the growth of that GDP. You've got a couple of 100 million who really have done very, very well. That disparity in wealth that we always are concerned about in the United States is magnified in China with far little care. So no one knows what that social ramification is going to be. And the concern is will we see that in the next 2 quarters, or is that something that's a couple of years away? Closer to home, closer to all of us in San Diego, is kind of the tension you've got between Mexico as a nation and narco-terrorism as a business. It's incredibly troubling. You've got a president that is taking it on. He's got the full support of the United States. And I think for one of the first times, we can think of Mexico as a strategic ally with strategic opportunity in a way we haven't thought about for the last couple of decades. One that Mike pointed out, and none of us had really thought about it, was the transatlantic divide. And the hypothesis he raises is, right after 9/11, NATO and the European Union, NATO invoked Article 5, which means it's mutual defense of the alliance, and they're in Afghanistan. Now, no one thinks they've hit the commitment we'd like to see. I would point out that they are there, they're taking casualties, and that's a big deal. Now, that will always be fraught with tension. If you think of the political debate we have in the United States over whether or not we should be in Iraq or Afghanistan, it pales compared to the debate within the EU. So his concern is, will they leave precipitously, and what will that do to the alliance? And is that something we might see in the next 2 quarters? Now, I just got back from NATO, working at The Hague and working in Brussels. I see nothing but support, but I wasn't working at the political level. I was working at we got to execute. So I'm confident they'll stay strong as allies. Mike raises the possibility that might change. And then the last one, oil. We do a lot of work in SAIC on alternative energy and energy efficiency. But I'm here to tell you, for at least the next decade, we are tied to a carbon-based economy. And oil is key to the global economy. There's a lot of elasticity in the price. It'll go up a couple of bucks. It'll come down a couple of bucks. The point I make here is, anytime you have variance off about 50 bucks a barrel, it just shuffles the deck. If you go price-wise too far below 50 bucks a barrel, nation-states like Russia begin to change how they operate and how they think. I was in Dubai and Abu Dhabi about 3 weeks ago. We have a project with a developer in Abu Dhabi to make a smart city. I was there 2 quarters ago. There were 40,000 construction workers on the project, basically moving islands, building bridges, creating a fairly dramatic venue for growth in Abu Dhabi. When I was there 2 weeks ago, 6,000 workers. Went from 40,000 to 6,000 in 2 quarters. The management team, which was mostly Brits, 1,800 of them, there's now 100. So think of that kind of a downturn in an economy, and Abu Dhabi has oil. When you go through Dubai, which is mostly built on debt and speculation, there are lots of empty buildings right now. Now they're counting on working out and being on the front end of any upswing. That's a big bet. But the point I'm making is, it's a bad thing when the price of oil goes too high because it begins to really affect the GDP of the United States. It's also a bad thing when the price of oil goes too low and you start seeing all sorts of capital plans change. And over the next couple of months, the next couple of quarters, you're going to see some fluctuations in oil prices. It'll affect our GDP as well as of our allies. Then Mike pointed out, besides what he kind of characterized as the red, the threat kind of portion of how he thinks, there's a lot of issues for U.S. policy. How we leave Iraq, how stable is it, and what will we continue to support over time? All of our relationships with Russia, it's got as much drama as with China. We have as equal probability of being friends as we do enemies as we try to walk down this narrow lane. So for both Russia and for China, there are so many things that we have in common that could cause us to work together on, and in the turn of a dime, it could go the wrong way. Two initiatives that I want to point out. The President will announce a national initiative this week, good continuity from President Bush on cyber. So think of the ability of folks to come in, not only use your networks, but really destroy networks. We've got examples. Think of when the Russians invaded Georgia. They did a denial of service attack where they went into computer systems, grabbed processing power, and shut down entire networks in the country of Georgia. What folks don't realize is the network that did that was run by the Russian mafia, and full 25% of their processing power came out of the United States. Now when you ask yourself, well, they've just walked across your firewall and they've grabbed your processing power to do a denial of service attack, what else are they doing when they're behind your firewall? What other IP are you losing? We had early warning of this when Estonia tore down a statue in Russia, and they basically got shut down for a week. Now, the reaction of the Estonians is it's now the center of excellence for cyber defense for NATO. So it was the exact opposite reaction than what that attack intended. What the President, what the National Security Agency, what most of government is concerned about is how secure are the networks, can we defend them, and is that a new warfare area equal to land and sea and air and space? The answer is going to be yes. And we can do a pretty good job of defending our networks around intelligence. We'll do really well around defense and defense contractors. The question is when you take it to rest of government, to .org, to .gov, when you take it to rest of industry, how do you balance security with privacy as well as with civil liberties? It's going to be a tough debate. Think of how fraught with peril the debate has been on domestic surveillance. So we've had this debate for several years now. There's a law called FISA. And think of domestic surveillance as there's a no-kidding known bad guy in Afghanistan calling somebody in the United States. And FISA says go to a court, get a warrant before you get inside that phone conversation. Use the rule of law. Now, the magnitude of how many calls there were and how do you do that has been the challenge, and that's what's been debated before the Congress. And it highlighted this tension between security and civil liberties. But when you think of a known bad guy in Afghanistan calling the United States, you think you probably got a pretty low hurdle to take action, and that was richly debated. Okay, now, break, thinking cyber. We don't know of a threat right now behind your firewalls. We assume it's there. Are you going to let a government tool come inside your firewall, clean it up, report on it, and maybe act? So if there's ever going to be an initiative that'll be, kind of the full Employment Act for lawyers, it's going to be cyber. Any lawyers in the room? Wow, this is unique. Smart power is something that Secretary Gates started with Secretary Rice in the last administration, and there's great continuity with the Secretary of Defense, now with Secretary Clinton. To give you a vignette, think today, we've got more members of military bands than we do foreign service officers in the State Department. We're out of balance as a nation. So what they're arguing is, it's good to get security and stabilization. You then need to do development and nation building. And we've learned this lesson, since I was in the Marine Corps and studying what had to happen in Nicaragua, back, several decades ago. Well, we've relearned it. Now, what it means, though, is you're going into harm's way, and it's not with a robust military force. It's going to be with development and investment and training and nation building. So smart power is going to happen in Afghanistan. It's happening in Mexico. It'll happen across the breadth of Africa. So think of any place where U.S. has a vital interest and a vital ally, reaching out and being prepared to help. Now as I go through that menu of what I'm thinking about for the next 2 quarters, you can see it's a pretty rich world, fairly chaotic, with lots of opportunities to defend U.S. interests in our allies and getting out there and making a difference. That's what drives SAIC and the company that Dr. Beister created. Who we are is a leading science and technology services company. We're platform independent. A lot of companies, they love their UAV. We love them all. We want to operate them. We want to be arm in arm supporting the mission of our customers. And we're not tied to any one platform. And we use that same analogy when we're looking at servers or blade servers. We don't really care what the platform is. We'll dial in the best solution for our customer set. It's been successful as a formula. This year, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary of the company that Dr. Beister created here in San Diego. We did $10 billion in revenue, which is usually a good number to achieve. And the challenge for myself and most of our team is, and we still have to grow 6 to 9% every year. So do that math on a $10 billion base. We have a focus on several market areas. National security is number 1. So we're 90+% federal funding. We're 70+% national security. And I'll give you some color on that. We do a lot of work around critical infrastructure. So think of port security. Besides the concern of aircraft security, we're worried something ugly is going to come through one of our ports and create a challenge for the United States. And where we ought to be inspecting cargo isn't in Long Beach or San Diego. It ought to be far away from our shores before they get to the United States. So we build gamma ray imagers, X-ray imagers, radiation isotope detectors. We build them all in Vista. So we basically consolidated our manufacturing from Canada, Kansas City, and we built up engineering here in San Diego. When you're looking for nuclear engineers, Southern California is not a bad place to look. So you'll see a consistent theme as I talk, where we're moving back office out of San Diego, and we're moving engineering into San Diego. And just tends to reflect how efficient can you manage your cost structure while still building up engineering capability. We do a lot of work around energy and the environment, fundamental research, energy efficiency, as well as support to the oil industry. We do upstream oil discovery. We do brownfield recovery of fields that are declining. And then in healthcare, we've got a range of capabilities from hard science all the way to healthcare IT. What unites all of them is we're a critical partner in solving the government's most challenging problems. For an SAIC employee, if it doesn't scare you to death, we probably don't want to do it. We don't do kind of lily-white IT. We want really big problems. So, oh my God, that's a problem. That gets an SAIC engineer really excited, especially if they're doing it in Afghanistan. We never have problems recruiting people. I can't get anyone to move to LA. Afghanistan, I got volunteers lined up out the door. The one thing that makes SAIC, I think, unique is the entrepreneurial culture of the company. We're 46,000 strong. There is a network resilience to having employees who think it's their job to go out and create business and they own the company. That's the culture that Dr. Beister created. They're incredibly engaged. I'm the COO. Any SAIC employee's got a good idea. They don't just walk into my office, they leap on my desk. And that's a culture you want to foster, and it's fairly unique. A little color on those areas that I talked about. Our most challenging, headwind right now is the Future Combat System. We're co-prime on a very large program that looks like it's getting dramatically restructured by Secretary Gates. So over the next couple of weeks, we'll figure out how is that restructured. We take charge and we focus on the systems engineering of a complex network, linking up all of the Army equipment and a data networking system. We think whatever they end up with, that part will survive. But when you're big as we are and you have large programs, and you're going through right now tremendous change by this Secretary of Defense, you're going to have some headwinds. So for all of you who are in business, always expect something will go bump in the night. Make sure your business is broad enough to absorb that, and you've got enough opportunities to counterbalance when you might face headwinds. For any of you who care about national security, take a look at Secretary Gates' article in Foreign Affairs from last December. And there's a debate going on right now in national security. And there's a couple of pieces to it. One is, are we going to prepare and fight for the war we have today in Iraq and Afghanistan? Or are we going to prepare and fight for some lower probability risk of tomorrow? And what's the balance? And Secretary Gates would argue we're out of balance. He says for the war we have today, it's about 10% of our resources. For the war of tomorrow, it's about 50%. There's about 40% kind of blended in between. So it's not either or, it's the shifting of resources and priorities to try to restore some balance. So if you care about that, the Foreign Affairs article is a good one. Second debate is the role of the services versus the combatant commands, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as well as the OSD Secretariat. Who decides and builds the force? The law that supports it, a thing called Title 10, basically empowers the services to recruit and to equip and to train. And I'd argue over the next several years, you're going to see this debate joined of how much is joint, driven by combatant commanders, versus the traditional services. So please be ready for that debate if you care. We build networks. We build the 10 gigabit Ether network for DoD DISA. We built the network for Department of Homeland Security around immigration and customs. So we run network operation centers. We team with all sorts of folks to put out add drop muxes and servers and robust networks. So we'll work it at the fundamental transport layer, and we'll go all the way up to mission-specific applications, and then our people will operate and run them. And we man the Predator Ops Centers. Everybody know what Predator is? So a great company here in San Diego, General Atomics, builds the Predator and the Reaper. It's leading-edge UAV work. The other one in town, Northrop Grumman, that builds Global Hawk. A lot of folks don't realize the center of the universe for UAVs is San Diego. What we do is think about the network, the operations, and the support of those. So we don't build the Reaper or the Predator or the Global Hawk. We build the ops centers and we help manage and run them wherever they go, wherever they need them. Energy and the environment. We actually bought a company that builds energy efficient facilities. We caught on doing analysis for EPA and DOE that energy efficiency was probably the bleeding edge of this movement to green technology. And there will be funding for alternative energies, but there is so much to be gained on the efficiency side first. So that's how we've kind of ordered it. Now, mind you, we've got an alternative fuel program for DARPA and the Air Force, where we're basically, taking, vegetables and turning them into JP8. That's easy to do, actually. But can you do it at a price point to compete with oil? That's the challenge. So there will be funding for alternative energy. You will see a lot of emphasis on energy efficiency. And the trigger, the inflection point to watch for is the legislation around a carbon cap and trade. And when you look at the staffing of the EPA and DOE, they are true believers. It is going to happen. The question is when. There will be winners and there will be losers. Be clear, our carbon cap and trade, somebody's going to get taxed. And then they're going to invest those dollars. What we at SAIC are hoping along the way is we gain a lot of efficiency, and we're making wise investments as we invest those dollars. But for any one of you in the marketplace that's in green technology, alternate energy, energy efficiency, a market will be made in the first 4 years of the Obama administration. You heard it here first. Bet on it. Healthcare is the next one. And I think it's not as soon to happen as carbon cap and trade, but it's going to happen. How many of you are happy with your healthcare plans? No, raise your hands. I really want to get a feel. So it's about a fifth of the room. So think of the vote count when a demographic like this room, where 20% of you are happy with your health plan. So what you're going to see, I believe, is a renewed debate over some national plan for health care. It will be heated, it will be hotly contested, and it'll be slower than a carbon cap and trade. But it'll be revisited. Now what we do, we've decided to stay government side and focus on the military. Stick to our knitting. We're not crossing over to that commercial health care debate. It is too fraught with politics, and we're not going there. What we want to focus on are wounded warriors, their health care, and how they work into the VA, and do they have data files and support through life. We also do research. So we manage the National Cancer Institute. It's government-owned, contract-operated. We operate it. Why do we do it? We don't make a lot of money at it, but a lot of SAIC employees are just enthused. They're trying to cure cancer. So as we manage the National Counterterrorism Center to counter terrorism, we also manage the NCI to cure cancer. And what I'm pointing to is that's the unifying mission of SAIC, is individuals using science to take on those big problem sets. We'll do smaller things where we lead biosurveillance efforts for the CDC. So there's a bad bug in the world. There's an SAIC volunteer hopping on a plane to go take samples somewhere in the boonies where there might be the next, viral vector of avian flu. And we're reporting back to the CDC. So it's a nice mix of science with a bit of adventure. Now, in terms of the company, no one can see this, so I'll just throw it all on there and walk through it. I apologize. When you think of some of the pieces as you're growing a company, there are foundational issues, there are growth initiatives, and then there's trying to create a more competitive posture. So in terms of the foundational issues, start with governance, and then start with a general management system where you've got the pace and the processes to run your business. Governance, we at one time had 18 directors, half of them insiders, 20 some odd committees. So now we've got 12 board members, only one insider, Ken Dahlberg, my boss, the CEO, 6 committees. It's a fundamentally sound governance structure. Best practices as seen by the Securities and Exchange Commission and our peers. But then make sure you've got 4 group presidents who know what markets they're creating, 20 business unit general managers who own customers and service and execution. And give yourselves some boundary conditions on how to operate in a complex marketplace. And then create seasonality. When do you talk about strategy? When do you talk about operations? When do you talk about talent? Where's the talent in the company? And one of the joys I have as I've risen in the company, how you spend your time changes. I spend more time on talent management today than I do on new business or execution. I'm in the people business. I'm trying to find the high potential employees of our 46,000. Where are they with diverse ideas and abilities? Can I find them and can I get them in play? That's my number one job. Now, will I go in and manage programs and worry about business development? Sure. But for me, it's all about people. So you've got to have those fundamental capabilities built into your processes, built into your calendars, and just built into the culture of the company. If you can do that, you can then shift all your focus externally. What's going on there in that chaotic marketplace? Do you have resources deployed? Can you add more resources to it? I leap out of bed every day thinking I'm going to grow top line. Why? Well, the alternative sucks. If you're not growing, think what that alternative is. It's not good. So I would always rather be crazed over growth than having to deal with the challenges of cutting a business. And I've had to. When I was at the County of San Diego, we were like, that close to bankruptcy. I had to cut. And I got to tell you, it's not as much fun as growth. So I highly recommend get foundational elements in place, shift your focus to growth. Now, one of the ways to do that is be more cost competitive. And that's one of our challenges. We grew up in La Jolla, California. We were doing accounts payable in La Jolla. No one in their right mind does accounts payable in La Jolla. So we moved that to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And what was surprising was how many of our employees wanted to move. Because in Oak Ridge, they could have a full acre with a 4,000 square foot house within walking distance of a lake, and the home was less than $200,000. So we had all sorts of volunteers to go to Oak Ridge. And we're walking through all of our back office and saying, you know what, that's moving to a cost-efficient area. Now when it's front office, customer relationships or engineering, yeah, we tend to double down in San Diego. Every one of you has to kind of go through that sense of tension within a business of what's important for customer execution and growth versus back office costs, and how do you get the right balance and tension. We think we've got it, and our financial performance has shown it. So whether it was our fourth quarter or the fiscal year, we grew top line 12%, 13%, organically 10%. In last year's market, that was considered a pretty good thing. We grew our operating margins. We promised to do 20 to 30 basis points each year, and we accomplished it. And we're a cash monster. We're net cash. We got $1 billion in cash, roughly. And we spend a lot of time on management of cash, the creation of cash. So across the board, our changes worked since our IPO in 2006, and we've been pretty consistent in the marketplace. Now, we've held our stock price. I don't know if anybody tracks this. Any shareholders? Well, we got to change that. How about any former employees? We have a theory that at SAIC, you either were, are, or will be an SAIC employee. Please check our website. There's always 1,500 job openings any day of the week. And it's www.saic.com. And you go right onto our first page, and there's a place there where we hire. So if you are interested in some of those exciting positions in Afghanistan or Thailand I mentioned, get on that website. Now when you start looking at the year ahead, there's a host of challenges. And we basically think over the next couple of years, these are the transitional challenges of the Obama administration. And we often, because we're so much weighted towards federal government, when I think strategic planning, I think in the context of 4-year terms by presidents, and I think of 2-year political cycles, and I always try to look for the ebb and the flow. What's kind of the normal rhythm of that process, and then I think of strategy around that rhythm and that calendar. First out of the gate, and it outweighs everything else like 10 to 1, is the domestic economy. It's in the toilet. And everybody that keeps looking for those green shoots of hope, everybody's praying for that first sign of recovery. Don't confuse a recovery with what they call a dead cat bounce. That's a term of art in Wall Street that says it comes up a little bit before it goes back down. And it's testing a bottom. I don't think our economy's found bottom yet. Think of the headlines today. General Motors in bankruptcy. Think of the ripple effect that has across an economy. The one we track, we hire economists to actually advise us on this, former Fed members, and they don't think housing's found bottom yet. We got another year before housing finds bottom. And that is the driver for so much of the attitude of the consumer, which drives so much of our GDP. So I think there's at least another year before we find bottom. There'll be all sorts of learned economists who will differ with me and who are declaring the recovery is already here. I don't see it, I don't feel it, and I'm planning for another year of really tough economy. So suck it up, notch up the belt, work harder. When you think of the other trends, I've kind of categorized them, and Deb can give you a written copy of this. I apologize, no one in the back of the room can read this. Think of the impact of globalization, how it ripples at times to protectionism, how we've seen changes both in industry and technology in both industrial government workforces. They all come together for a pretty dynamic environment. So you want to pay attention to some of those macro, kind of factors within the economy, and make sure within your business you've at least thought about them. So think of this as a menu that I offer to you for the next couple of years. Walk through it and think about how it impacts your products, your services, and what you're doing. Then I get into the unknowns of China, the fact that there's just pure unpredictability. Any organization has to have some amount of resiliency to deal with the unknown. And no matter how good your strategy, how thoughtful your advisors, you're going to miss something. You're going to do it. So what you want to do is make sure there is some excess capacity and resiliency to deal with the unknown. Now here's one of the secrets to the unknown. Often it's upside, it's not just downside. So you got to be prepared to distinguish which one is it when you encounter the unknown, and do you have the excess capacity to respond and react, to adapt, and be ready to exploit it. Now, we believe there'll be lots of changes in the intelligence community and the defense budget, how we fight wars. And throughout all of this, lots of scandals. I've never seen an environment where so many people hate other groups with such passion. I watched it flip with President Obama's, it wasn't the State of the Union, but his first speech. Who were the number one bad guys? Wall Street. Now, I know a lot of bankers, and they fit pretty well in this room. They're not inherently evil. And often in the political dialogue, it has to be a war of good versus evil, as opposed to, okay, here's the problem we got ourselves into, how are we going to get out of it? That tension, that creation of that dialogue of good versus evil is continuing to ripple. I'm nervous. I've got a COO title. Who's number 2 on the hit parade for evil these days? CEOs. They're making too much money. Now, mind you, half of them make less than a shortstop playing for one of our National League ball teams. But they're in the evil category right now. I pray we don't go to shortstops. I'm a baseball fan. But you're going to see a lot of that dialogue, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Watch this Supreme Court nomination. It will be good versus evil, and it'll get rough before it gets over. I think that's prelude to the nature of what we're going to face over the next 4 to 8 years. I don't see an answer to it. So I just tend to accept it. I don't know if you ever saw that Bose commercial for the great set of speakers. And there's a guy with a long blonde hair facing the speakers, and it's going straight out behind his head. That's the political environment today. You just got to accept the noise level and then step back and say, what's core to you? What do you believe in? And stick to your knitting. Stick to your core beliefs. Now for us in the company, we put a lot of emphasis in business development. Remember I said growth is good, the alternative sucks? So we spent a lot of money, time, and effort to build backlog and increase our focus on large jobs. One of the things we purposely did was lower our win rate. You say, well, why would you do that? SAIC is famous for 90% win rates of all recompetes, 60+% win rates for all jobs. Why would you lower it? Well, it's a hall pass for people that take a risk. So you know what? We're winning too much. We want to go out on the edge of the probability curve, and we want to take on a high flyer. Pick your metaphor. We want to swing for the fences. We want to take a chance. We want to take a risk, and you'll be rewarded for it. And it's worked for us. So we've taken on far more what we call $100 million jobs. And for a little tiny SAIC, compared to a Northrop Grumman or a Lockheed or GD, wow, that's like the Lilliputians taking on, trying to tie down Gulliver. And it's friendly like that. In most of it in aerospace, you're never in death combat. The people you compete with today, you team with tomorrow. But it's still a lot of fun, I think, to fight out of your weight class. If you want to unify a team, if you want to collaborate across your entire business, take on a challenge that appears to be insurmountable. And what it forces you to do is work way outside your comfort zone. You have to team across every part of your business. And at SAIC, we reach outside the company. Of our $10 billion in top line, over $1.5 billion of it is our small business teammates. We decided purposely not to vertically integrate. A lot of the big primes said, we'll do it all ourselves. Here's one offering, government. You know what? I'd rather have a small, disadvantaged, entrepreneurial business team with me than doing it all myself. Well, why? The network is always more powerful than any one individual. When Dr. Beister created the company, had up on his wall, all of us are smarter than any one of us. Well, when you get to a revenue run rate of $10 billion, all of us have to extend outside the company, and we have literally hundreds of small businesses that team with us every day. So we're always on the hunt for the next great idea that says, wow, this complexity of business is just too hard with government. We'd love to offer it to us, but SAIC, can you help us? Or it's a complex network. Oh, by the way, in Iraq, you're at 23 forward operating bases. Could you help us deliver this solution? So that's the business model. And I'm telling you, every one of you can go take on a fight out of your weight class that really requires everyone on the team to pitch in and to reach outside your comfort zone in terms of teaming. We also augment growth with acquisitions. So since our IPO, we've spent about $700 million buying companies. So besides teaming with small businesses, we buy them. So we'll always be on the lookout for strategic partners. And what's our perfect acquisition? We've worked with them for years. We like and respect the management team. They've got some interesting competitive differentiator, and we're going to have fun together. And don't forget fun in business. We want to make money for our shareholders. We definitely want to execute for our customers. But rule one for me, team first, everything else second. And one of the essences of forming a team, you've got to have fun together. And you can do it by taking on challenges. You can do it just through social interaction. That's a big part of successful acquisitions. One of my tests is, am I going to have fun with this team? Do I like them? And do we like each other? That is the essence. You really are thinking of SAIC as a very extended family business. Now, there's 46,000 of us in the family, but it's nice to have that kind of personal interaction as well as the business plan that's got the ROI, and you keep them in balance. Now, our enterprise objectives going forward, same thing we said at the IPO on October the 13th. It was a Friday the 13th in 2006. We said each year, every year, you know what, we're going to grow top line 6 to 9% organically. We'll improve our margins 20 to 30 basis points. And guess what? We'll grow earnings 11 to 18%. And we've kept our promise. And we've kept it in a pretty tough marketplace. Now, mind you, we had an easy compare. When we went out in 2006, we weren't a shining light on the top of the mountain in terms of financial performance. So we've done very well, in part because our compare was so low. And you'll hear this term compare often in the street. Every year it's going to get a bit harder. We have to be a bit more creative. But we think we've got the wherewithal to do it. As we deploy cash, invest in engineering capabilities, we are building light touch production. There was a time at SAIC where not only would we not do it, we wouldn't even talk about it. So today we do it. In Poway, we're building tsunami buoys. So we're selling buoys that warn of incoming tsunamis to China, to Indonesia, to Australia, the United States. And we support the U.S.'s National Buoy Program. But when we build them, it's in Poway. In Rancho Bernardo, we've got manufacturing for one of my favorite spooky customers, where we're building little things for them, one off at a time. In Vista, we're building stuff for vehicle and cargo inspection. It's a $300 million business. Point Loma, we're building acoustic devices. So what we've done, what we've centered on is some manufacturing where we know the customer and the domain better than anyone else, and they ask us to build it. So it's not a purposeful hard left or hard right into manufacturing. It's natural evolution. One of my theories, never go more than one field afar. Know what your comfort zone is, know where your business is, and then think of what's that next field. It's just right over that horizon. That's a good place to go. If you go a country mile down the road, you've probably gone too far. But always test those boundaries and try to think, what's that next field you're going to cross? We've got corporate campaigns around energy, health, cyber, and space superiority. We build space payloads in San Diego. A lot of folks don't realize it, but at any day of the week, we're operating on 6 or 7 satellites where we've built star cameras and other capabilities for them. A campaign is a purposeful investment where you see a strategic opportunity. It's not in the day-to-day pace of your business, but you want to focus investment in energy. And you say, you know what? I'm calling it a campaign. It's going to have a leader. It'll have investment. And it may not have well-thought-out financial goals right out of the gate. If it did, you probably have it in your core business. But what you're doing is you're giving it life and sustenance for some period of time, and you're taking a risk in the marketplace. That's what we do with campaigns. And then one of the ways we fund it, we're cutting corporate overhead, and we're investing in organic growth. There is no excuse for inefficiency in your G&A expenses and your overhead. Every dollar of overhead is an investment dollar, and the shareholders and the employee owners of SAIC ought to think of it as a dollar to invest. And is it better spent on accounts payable in La Jolla, or is it better spent on growing top line for one of our campaigns? Let me tell you how every SAIC employee votes. Invest. So when you're trying to make tough decisions over cutting your costs, what's your investment strategy? Don't talk about cutting till you know what you're going to do with investing. Why are you doing it? What's the strategic imperative? Now today it might be survival. For a lot of businesses that are cash strapped, you need runway. Your campaign is runway. It's how do I wait out the downturn in the economy? For us, it's investment opportunities for growth. But you have to define for your business, where are you in the market, what's your cost structure, and is it helping you get to where you need to be? Now the summary, 2 years after our IPO, our investment thesis has not changed. Our shareholder base has. Our shareholders, as we came out of the gate, 80% hedge funds. They all got into trouble last year. I don't know if you noticed. They have this word called redemption. Now, I'm Irish Catholic, and I had a very different definition of redemption. For hedge funds, it means you got to pay back your limited shareholders. And SAIC actually had liquidity. Our stock was trading. It was valued. So 80% of our shareholder base changed in 6 months. It went from hedge funds to classic mutual funds. And that happened over about a 6-month period of time. And we held our stock price through that drama of losing the hedge funds. Now, hedge funds are real smart money. We'll get some of them back in over time. But to me, it was an indication of how tumultuous and what the turmoil is in the marketplace. We're a Fortune 500, fairly conservative company, and we changed that 80% of our shareholder base in 6 months. That's drama. The company is executing on the plan. We've demonstrated, I think, good progress since the IPO. We're winning large bids. We've put about $700 million in acquisitions. We do share repurchases. We'll buy back our stock. We think it's a pretty good investment. And we think the incentive programs, the way we motivate is as important as talent management. Everybody's got to have a dog in the fight. They got to care. And you know what? Paying them well for it's not a bad idea. Now what I want to leave you with is really extend the horizon. This is something that CSIS does. It's a think tank out of D.C. John Hamre's the president. He's on our board. We've taken a hard look at what they call the 7 revolutions. And what they're looking at are kind of logical things that are happening today that you start extending out over decades. And what I find amazing is how many of them are accelerating and are topical today as opposed to 2025. So the first one is all about demographics. Be clear, the number one thing that affects all our lives are demographics. So whether it's the baby boomers about to retire and what impact will it have in the United States on Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and when they go bankrupt, it's going to impact your lives, and it's going to happen the next decade. It won't wait for 2025. And that's nothing. That's trivial compared to the demographics happening with growth of populations across the Middle East, and you see unemployed teenagers that are growing at a phenomenal rate, and what does that mean for stability in a region? Think in China, with selective abortion, where there's a real priority and precedence for a male baby. Look at what the demographics are telling us over the next 20 years and how out of balance that population is going to be. It's pretty frightening when it's that disproportionate to males in society. Everything we've looked back in time says that's going to be exciting for us. The aging of Japan and Europe. The aging of the United States, but counterbalanced with immigration. I don't care where you are in the immigration debate, immigration is good for an aging population. It sustains the U.S., and compared to the EU and the EU and Japan, we're managing it much better. Resource management and environmental stewardship. How about water? Water is still a right, it's not a commodity. In some places in the world, it's becoming a commodity. I go to Saudi Arabia every quarter. They are energy rich. They invested in desal. There is absolutely no land use issues about siting any plant to do anything in Saudi Arabia. And they can't produce enough water. So think what I'm telling you here in California, in Southern California. We can't site energy, and it takes an act of God to site a desal plant in Carlsbad. And if they can't get it done in Saudi Arabia, what does it mean for us over the next 20 years? So something's going to have to change. Think of France with 20 plus nuclear power plants. So the French and the Japanese can site a nuclear plant like that. We do asset management for several of them. Our customers for nuclear aren't any longer in California. So think for both SAIC and General Atomics, that's where our companies started, with nuclear engineers. Where do we have them working today? France. So just the ability to go through the politics of siting a plant is nearly impossible, and at some point in time we're going to have to do it because water is inextricably tied to energy. And we're not doing either well in terms of capital investment. And I don't think that's a 2025 issue. I think it's a this decade issue. When you think of technical innovation and diffusion, it just causes a lot of peril and chaos as we think of a flat global economy, the movement of labor, the movement of capital. Now, we thrive at chaos at SAIC. One of my investors says, if there's ever an end of days Armageddon scenario, I'm buying SAIC stock. And, it's not exactly the portfolio I want to serve in a hedge fund. But what it means is, we're really good at dealing with tough problems. And what many of the hedge funds are pointing to is this chart. The world will get increasingly chaotic. And technology and the diffusion of it has a good side and it has a troubling side. We had no concern about cybercrime before we had the internet. Think of all of the developments in the biosciences and genetics. We don't even know yet what challenges they're going to cause for society. We just know they're going to be out there. So technology is wonderful. We're enthusiastic about it. There are always consequences. And what gets us excited are the unpredictable ones no one's thought about yet that you need to be prepared to be resilient to deal with. The dissemination of information and knowledge. A good thing and sometimes a bad thing. There's folks across the U.S. who know how to build a bomb and they learned it on the internet. There's a variety of examples of diffusion of knowledge that will challenge us as a society we need to be prepared for. But for every challenge, there's an answer as we diffuse knowledge as well. Economic integration. I pointed out, China and the United States. How unbelievably intertwined our economies are. And sometimes we forget that at the political and the policy level. So there is an opportunity and a risk when you're so integrated. And you're going down this path of worrying about China and the Taiwan Straits. And you forget that probably every one of your laptops is coming out of there. And you think of, well, what's the trade space that I've got to make policy decisions when our economies are so intertwined? Think of our dependence on oil And think of succession planning in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They've been a loyal ally since World War II. And before 2025, they're going to go through regime change. And it will affect the challenge of governance and the integration of our economies, and it's fairly unpredictable. Nature of conflicts changed. Just think of the debate they're having today, relearning the lessons of counterinsurgency in Iraq, relearning the importance of development and training, of integrating with our partners and our allies early on, and don't wait for the Fulda Gap War to happen. And finally, challenge of governance. Think of Africa. A lot of you benefit today from gallium arsenide, chip design that fuel, that power every one of our computers. Rare earth elements are rare. And you cross the globe to find them. We're integrated inextricably with the economies of Africa, often around rare earth elements. The impact of AIDS has decimated generations of leadership across Africa, and it's entirely unpredictable what happens to governance, to allies today and allies tomorrow, and how they sustain through time. So what I'm pointing out is over the next several years, it's exciting today, and every trend line says it'll be more exciting by 2025. So as I painted General Hayden's picture of the next 6 months, our midterm list of possibilities over the next 2 years, and what CSIS says out to 2025, it's a world that has a bit of chaos to it and a lot of smart people trying to make things better. And that's kind of core to SAIC. So let me stop there and take any questions you might have. I appreciate your attention, especially every one of those comfortable chairs that stayed away.